Hello, the internet, and welcome to Open Source Directions, hosted by Quansight, the webinar that brings you all the news about the future of your favorite open source projects. My name is Anthony Skopatz, your host for Open Source Directions. Co-hosting with me today is...
Hi, I'm David Charbonneau. I'm excited to be the co-host for this episode of Open Source Directions. I lead the development of open teams here at Quansight, and I'm based out of Durham, North Carolina.
Hi, everybody.
Yep. Carol, go ahead.
Okay.
No, Carol, go ahead.
I'm going off script already. I've already messed it up. Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Willing, and I'm very happy to be here, and I'm glad you're here to listen to what we have to share about Jupyter. And I'm a Jupyter Steering Council member with a strong focus on Jupyter's use in learning, and also a Python core developer.
And hi, everyone. I'm Matthias Buissonnier. Really happy to be hosted by today and have Carol as a co-guest. As for my occupation, by day, I'm a research facilitator at the University of California, Merced. And by night, I'm a Pythonista mostly, and one of the early founders of Jupyter and co-developer of Jupyter, and also a lot of IPython side.
Yeah, great. Thanks to both of you for being here, and it's great to finally have you both on the show.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So, as usual, we have a personalization section right at the front of the episode just to get to know everybody a little bit better. And so this week we have selected our famous Tweet of the Week section, where each of our panelists goes ahead and presents a tweet that they've been enjoying in the past week. Carol, I believe you are up first if you want to share your tweet today.
Yeah, I have a tweet from Jessie Frizzell, and she's been very popular in the Docker community and infrastructure stuff. And the tweet is, I think there's a different class of programmer, like those in The Soul of a New Machine and Halt and Catch Fire. The idealists, dreamers, those who build things with soul, value accomplishments, and being a part of something bigger than themselves. And I feel like that's what Jupyter has been for the last 5 years, and the community as well. So it kind of just resonated.
Yeah, very inspirational. I believe, Matthias, you have you're up next.
Yes, so I know that Twitter tend to be often like people tend to fight on Twitter and have bad sentiment and shout at each other. So I prefer to follow humorous accounts. So maybe like you interleave kittens and puppies with the rest of your daily threads. And I was thrown between two accounts. One is called I Am a Developer, and the other is Internet of Shit. Internet of Shit is basically tweeting about IoTs, so Internet of Things. You'll see the puns on the name, and I'm going to go with one of the recent tweets that was basically quoting one tweet from The Verge, like Samsung's new fridge will ping your phone if you leave the door open, and the answer was, why the beep doesn't it close the door itself? It's so smart, which I think is pretty funny. We tend to do a lot of things with Internet of Things. Say, hey, everything should be on the internet. We can do crazy things. We tend to forget that you could actually interact with the world more than with software, and you can actually have motorized things and everything. It's also give you a lot of thoughts about like, do you really want everything to be connected? Like, I don't really want my fridge to be connected. I don't really want people to know that I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. to eat chocolates because I'm stressed, for example. So definitively, I'm more like many people in the tech industry that are concerned about security, don't want to put everything online.
Well, you just showed your hand about the 5 a.m. chocolate eating right there, Matthias. David, you're up next.
Yeah, there's one I came across this week or last week maybe that was interesting, just in that it's focused on a tool we use every day, right? Our source code management. And Git has all these different merge strategies. You can do squash, you can just do the merge. If you're doing, from pull requests, this is especially important. And Richard Meinrich tweeted that it'd be nice if Git preserved the real history, but let you hide it in favor of a tidy, groomed history. That way you get the best of both worlds. I don't see why it wouldn't be technically possible. Now, a bit of self-promotion. I replied, I proposed Git pinch, right? Where when you do the merge, it would hold on to, it would point to where it should jump. That way you could eventually make Git log's default behavior to jump over the history you want to hide, but it's still there. So you could be like git log verbose and it would show it.
That's cool.
Cool idea. For my tweet, I would like to share something that Taryn Zie tweeted out, which basically says, Chapter 1, Physics, Section 1.1, History. Aristotle said a bunch of stuff that was wrong. Galileo and Newton fixed things up. Then Einstein broke everything again. Now we've basically got it all worked out, except for small stuff, big stuff, hot stuff, cold stuff, fast stuff, heavy stuff, dark stuff, turbulence, and the concept of time, which I couldn't agree with more. So,
that's hysterical.
With that being said, at this point, we'll go ahead and get into our project introduction. So this will be a brief introduction to Jupyter, which normally needs no introduction, but hopefully we'll be able to provide a little more context for where Jupyter is going in the future, given some of its history here. So the Jupyter ecosystem is very, very large. There's about, I guess, I'm not sure what these numbers are in our script here exactly, but 52, I guess this is download statistics for Jupyter, but I'm sure it has more than the numbers I'm seeing, so we'll skip those on a monthly basis. But I guess the part of what makes tracking Jupyter a little difficult is that Jupyter, quote unquote, itself is a meta package, right? So Matthias, did you have some comments that you wanted to say about how popular Jupyter is, broadly speaking?
It's relatively hard, like with a lot of open source, basically you can do whatever you want with the code, and we really like to basically not track users. So it's relatively difficult to figure out exactly how Jupyter is used. And so basically, if you have a use case, the best thing you can do for us is come and say, hey, this is how I use Jupyter. And so we had some rough estimate back of the envelope calculation. Most of the developers are like physicists or biologists, and we do like rough estimate. We estimate right now that last year Jupyter had around 8 million users worldwide. Like looking at some downloads on Linux and doing extrapolation and doing downloads on PyPI and Conda. To give you a comparison, worldwide, there is 21 million people that self-identify as developers, and 4.4 million if you just look at North America. So basically, like worldwide, we have twice as many users as developers that we have in North America. If you look at a recent project like Visual Studio Code that was released by Microsoft 2 years ago, I believe, they are at around 2.6 million users. And GitHub had last year, I believe, 24 million users. So that's basically give you the scale of the project, but of course, like we don't have really perfect statistics.
Yeah, but it's large.
Yeah.
It's a big number.
Very popular.
It's
It sort of goes back to your physics tweet.
Yeah, that's right.
So why was this project started, and what need does it fill?
I think like I was one of the early developers of the Jupyter side. We'll see more about the history, I think, later in the episodes. And the crux was, I think, feeling for interactive computing. And having like literate computing, if you compare with literate programming, where you basically directly interact with your data. There's been a lot like of communization of computing and of programming, and we really wanted something where someone who doesn't have a background in computer science can really rapidly leverage the power of a computer, leverage the power of a language, to not do pure computer science, but do science next to it. And so that's basically why we developed that for ourselves first, to have a nice interface when we can analyze our data, have explanation and math in line, and get our results in line. And that's basically, I think, that the fact that also the browser that you have is something that everyone is used to. You know how to use the internet. You don't have to see the scary command line. That's like most of people, the first time you see a command line, it's really like scream hackers, on screen when like Operation Swordfish. It's not something that you think is scary. Hacker has often a negative connotation. And so I think that's some of the things that made Jupyter like really, really powerful at the beginning, and how it started to gain a lot of traction. Maybe Carol has more insight about the later part of Jupyter.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with IPython notebooks, then became Jupyter since about 2013, and was using it with actually our user groups in San Diego and sort of messing around with it. And when I found it, I was like, this is the coolest thing. This makes, you know, science and computers fun. Like, I wish I had had it when I was doing calculus homework like a million years ago.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what it did is it was not intimidating. It had like a simplicity to it that was engaging, yet you could do very complicated things. So I actually started playing around with it using a music theory library. So to even break down the barriers more. And I just think there's something just innately welcoming about the interface. And
something nice and accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great that you can rerun those cells as often as you like. It kind of removes the hurt. Like, you know, if you're running a script and you run the whole thing and something goes wrong, it's kind of crushing. But if it's just a little cell that went wrong, you tweak it, try again, tweak it, try again. I've seen people do that, and it just really seems like it's just friendlier.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the hardest thing to get over is just knowing how to shift enter. That took me longer than probably anything else with Jupyter. So
it's not quite as bad as how do I get out of Vim, but
I know. Just randomly smash your keyboard, I guess. I don't know. But
Well, so that being said, are there alternative projects to Jupyter out there that you can list and name and some of the differences there?
Yes, I mean, we try to make Jupyter, I mean, first, like, there is a default implementation, but we made also a lot of protocols and try to standardize and write the standards that everybody that want to first interact with us can just rewrite one piece. And so what you see is two things. You see different UIs that are talking to Jupyter or with the Jupyter protocol. So you can have UIs, so user interfaces, that are either reusing our parts or completely re-implementing everything and are just completely compatible. And you also see completely competitors that have rewritten things in a different way. So to cite a few, like you have things like our IDE, like for example, RStudio or Spider, or more IDE where people do data science in them. You have more notebook-like where you have cells next to each other. And so, for example, you could have Zeppelin, which is a complete separate implementation that has a notebook interface. But you have Interact, which is Electron-based desktop app that use the protocol written in JavaScript. Has nice thing that you double-click and it opens things that take different approach, which is completely compatible with what we do. We have Collaboratory by Google, which is online, completely online, reusing the Jupyter protocol. You will also have text editors that will have the ability to talk to Jupyter. So basically, you are in your normal text editor, but your editor can send code to be run by Jupyter, any kernel by Jupyter. And so, for example, you have Vim, and you even have operating systems that are compatible with Jupyter, like Emacs, for example. So yeah, and we try to really try to get compatibility protocols and the ability to talk with each other and not try to lock people in, because we want long-term archivability of research and for people to be able to search different phase space or where they need to have their own UI or your own protocol.
Right.
Yeah, and I think building off of that, because we have that de facto standard messaging specification that lets us communicate with the different front ends, as well as the notebook format and how it's stored, it makes it so that you can develop your own custom things, but yet still get work done and be able to share it with other people, which I think is really important. And in the scope of sharing things, Jupyter Hub and Binder, which are more our distributed offerings, they bring notebooks to groups of users. And one of the things that's nice about it is the way Jupyter Hub was initially architected. It had this concept of allowing people to write different custom things for authentication or for spinning up notebooks in a particular way. And it wasn't overly opinionated on you must use XYZ or this particular service. So what we've seen is, an explosion of things like Colab and Azure Notebooks and Amazon, as well as other things like Grid, Paperspace, Pangeo, YT. I mean, we're seeing in a lot of different projects as well using Binder and Jupyter Hub technology.
Right. Yeah, very cool. Like you built the playground and then other people are coming to play in it. So
That's right. Yeah. It's a good way to look at it.
yeah.
It reminds me of kind of like HTTP in a way, right? Where you defined a protocol, not a browser or a server. Yeah.
Yeah, very similar.
And I believe like the web technology also is one of the things that we build. We build a lot of Jupyter on web technology, which means that every improvement to the web technology, WebGL or videos or sound,
it lifts you with it.
Yes.
What are the core technologies that Jupyter is built on?
So the core technology of the default implementation is Python, JavaScript, TypeScript for the new Jupyter Lab. The server in the back is written in Tornado. I think you already had Dask previously in an episode that is using Tornado. And for the communication with the kernel, we use ZMQ, which is relatively cross-language. It has C bindings. So most languages basically can have one side in one language and another in another side. And that can talk either locally on the same machine or on the remote network, which makes some of the power of Jupyter. And of course, these days we are mostly like completely only Python 3. Because like, and even like, yeah, hooray! We've dropped Python 2 on most of our projects because Python 2 end of life is January 1st of next year, which is less than a year. And so like we are pushing forward, and it also allow us to make brand new features for people, ability to drop old legacy Python. And I think that's basically it. After you have to dig into each project to know what they're made of. But that most of the technology, at least for some of the core stack. Carol has probably more to say on all the deployments and services.
Yeah, I mean, the deployments, you could, deploy Jupyter Hub on bare metal or Binder Hub on bare metal. But one of the things that I think really accelerated the adoption of Jupyter Hub was Kubernetes and the ability to, we put together a 0 to Jupyter Hub guide as a project team, and I see Eric's on the chat, and he was instrumental in keeping that up to date and adding things to it. But it made it much easier to deploy a very complicated system and to be able to replicate those deployments. And if I look back on like somebody like Andrea Zonka, who's at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, who has a fantastic blog for folks that are in that space, he's been using Jupyter Hub since pretty much the beginning. And the complexity of his blog posts, it gets easier and easier to deploy Jupyter Hub, and yet now they're doing even more cool stuff with it. So
right,
free up those resources.
Yeah,
it's a real power combo.
It totally is.
So who started Jupyter as a project, or perhaps who started IPython as a project might be a better question.
I will probably answer to that because I'm probably the more senior in the project from both of us. So it was technically started in 2001 by Fernando Perez, at the time a graduate student who started a long tradition of procrastinating on our PhDs. Basically, many people after him started to say, hey, I have a PhD to finish. Can I do something else instead? And so basically, he had many languages that he was using together, Perl, C, Makefiles, and so on and so forth, and discovered Python and say, oh, I can glue together things with Python. But Python doesn't have a nice interactive story. I'm not nice enough. So the plastic REPL, there was a REPL. And so he basically, in an afternoon, 100 of something line script became IPython 0.1. After a lot of time went through, some of people joined the project. It stayed IPython and purely a terminal things for a couple of years. We had, like, he met with John Hunter, the author of Matplotlib, Travis Oliphant, the creator of NumPy, who created some of the reason why things move forward the way they did. And around 2009, after Brian Granger and me and Megan Kelly and I think Paul Ivanov joined, they got a grant from NSART at the time to basically start to create a network-enabled Qt console at the time. So split the IPython process to have a remote process and have a console that looked like a terminal and have ability to embed images. So that was released around 2011. And around that time, we also got the notebook. and a couple of other languages where we created kernels. The second languages was actually Julia, if you've heard of Julia, which is a language from MIT. By the way, congrats to Jeff, Stefan, Viral, and Alan for their recent award. Like, Julia is a really nice language. And so like the question was, like, we have IPython, the IPython notebook, and it can run R, it can run Julia, it can run Python. And for everybody except the Python people, basically, like, why do I have to install IPython if I want to run R, if I want to run Julia? And so the decision was taken around 2014 to basically split IPython into multiple parts. So IPython itself, that got back to only the Python side, the Python kernel, and Jupyter, which was all the language agnostic parts, the notebook, all the protocol and things like that. So well, technically the code that from 2001 from Fernando Perez, Jupyter started with a group of people in 2015.
Thank you for that overview. It's really interesting the way it didn't start off with the intention of getting to notebooks, but the possibility was opened, and then when it was recognized, people made it happen. So there's been some phenomenal growth in Jupyter over the past 5 years. What do you think is driving that?
Do you want to start, or you want me to start?
Oh, go ahead.
I've
talked a lot, so go ahead.
I kind of touched on it a little bit when we started, but I think the fact that it lets people be effective and do computation as well as communicate results, and it makes it have a very powerful story. And I think part of that, combined with the communities and the different, Python's got a very rich ecosystem of wonderful scientific computing packages. And I think the combination of the two, all of a sudden you had this vehicle to make using all those different packages simultaneously much easier. And I think that's one of the huge drivers behind it. I don't know what you think, Matthias.
I mean, some people pointing in the chat, we were probably not the first project to try doing that. But I think, like, basically the fact that it's free. It was actually the 6th iteration of the notebook interface. Make it really nice. Like, you can use it in a plane. You don't have to have a license. You don't have to wait for someone else. You can just install, like, if you're a student, you don't have to go to the university lab to run it. You can just install it on your machine. And I think that's something which is really nice. Like, it really levels the differences between people. You don't have to be at an university that have a lot of fundings to get, like, nice software. You can use just the same time if you're in a corner. And basically the only thing that differentiates you from others is basically your own ability. It really erase background. It erase, like, all this baggage that that can impair you into doing your research.
Right. So who maintains Jupyter? That might be a somewhat complicated question sometimes, but
you would think that, like, the core team of Jupyter would be, like, I think I asked it like the beginning of a talk at Georgia Tech, and people are like 150 people, 200 full-time people, and it was like, no. And then I put up, like, a picture of our core developer meetings, and it's probably what, 20-ish people at those meetings, and some are funded through their companies, some are funded under the grant, but we really rely heavily on the community to help us maintain the projects. And because there's so many different aspects within Jupyter, we've tried to communicate within the READMEs, in the GitHub repos, who's maintaining the project. We try and give people commit rights if they're contributing a fair amount to the project and are interested in that. But I think it's a volunteer effort, like most things in open source.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, most of the work is done by volunteers on night and weekends, me included. And even if you're branded as a core developer, it doesn't mean that you're even paid even a single cent to contribute to the project. One thing we try to do is when we have regular volunteers that become core contributors. For when we have money, we try to fly them to conferences, or we try to meet with each other once or twice a year, which become harder and harder because the core team is growing on like every day. And we have to realize that a lot of the things that make the success of Jupyter is not always maintainers that are writing codes, but also people that are helping on social media, who are doing YouTube videos, and they don't have to be on the main Jupyter channel. We didn't have any videos in a long time, but it's basically all the community that is self-organizing. And we are doing our best. Once you get commit right, you basically say, well, we are going to do our best to basically push others forward and help others doing what they want to do. And often it means writing less code and spending more time managing people.
Right, yeah, the normal open source problems.
Mm.
Well, what communities and users what communities are users and contributors coming from?
Wow, the question might be better asked, where aren't they coming from? You know, one of the fabulous things is because it's open source, unlike some of the notebooks that were perhaps before Jupyter, we've seen a lot of global interest in Jupyter, places where getting, you know, licenses for expensive software would be very hard. So we're seeing a lot of academics in those places using it, a lot of scientists, researchers, data scientists. The contributors often come from, they've been like these delighted users and seen the value in it and then want to give back as well. Hi, Travis. Nice to see you on the live stream. And then, you know, educators are pushing it into other areas, whether it's education at like the highest levels or, you know, community workshops or non-traditional education. It's really been a game changer there. And then enterprise is finding lots of ways to combine it with machine learning and the growth there to actually offer services to their customers, such as like Stitch Fix that has built a whole business around, you know, how to use data to better satisfy your customers.
I think one of my favorite talks at JupyterCon this summer was the one where the journalism school professor and his students had written an article that got into the New York Times on tracking fake Twitter followers for popular accounts. That was very interesting. They weren't programmers at all, but they gathered the data and did the analysis. It was very cool and representative of the breadth of folks that are getting involved.
Right, and I think that's a good point. I mean, journalism and, you know, using data for government uses and for, you know, access to open government information has been another area where it's been very popular and impactful as well.
Right. Speaking of impact, is Jupyter participating in any diversity and inclusion efforts?
So yes, of course. I mean, we're trying to do our best, especially in tech, where you have often like a high proportion of white male between like in their 20s or 30s, which definitely I'm part of. On a day-to-day basis, most of us always try when we interact with people online to be welcoming and encourage people to contribute. We most of the time prefer to teach people how to contribute than doing it ourselves. Even if it could take us half an hour to do something, or even just 5 minutes, we will spend more, like if we take a day or a week to get someone to contribute. If they want to, if they don't want to, it's fine. You just tell us and we're going to move that. That often includes allowing users to contact us in private, because you might not be open to discussing in public, like especially saying you don't know, I mean, something which is relatively hard, going over the language barrier. Which I definitely understood when I joined the project. My English was like completely horrible, it's still, but and so often it's finding the right technical or emotional language. I tend to really give like short snippets, but if people don't understand, like basically go down to exactly telling them what to type. It's something which is relatively difficult when you're not with a person, because you don't have all the cues of the physical language online. So when we can meet in person at hackathon, it's always something we do. So that's on a day-to-day how we can try to help. We do our best with a small amount of time we have. We always do missteps, like every of us sometimes get get harsh or something like that. We also reserve some of our funding for diversity and inclusion. You can read on our blog for more details, but so far we have, I think, 2 people who are with the outreach program, who are basically contributing, and UV and me are mentoring them. And so it's basically like reaching out to diverse people and trying to get inclusion. And we also get some random funding for workshops, and people can propose things. And one of the recent proposal we funded was one where we got like really things that it's really nice, a really nice way of reaching out. And it's actually introduction to Python coding for kids, parents, and teacher, where basically they don't only teach kids how to do things, they basically get the parents with the kids and teachers and get all of them together, move forward on code. I think it was hosted or is going to be hosted in the UK somewhere. I don't remember. So those are some of the way we try to push for diversity. And trying to also find non-code contribution, because most people also like focus on commit rights, but trying to figure out who is doing contribution, which is critical to this to the Jupyter project, which is not code-wise. It's always harder to measure, but we try to also focus on that.
Yeah, and inclusion is a huge topic, and making things, and I try to look at it as, what can you do that has a multiplier effect? And one of the big things is what we did in the Python community. We tried to create a welcoming, thoughtful community around it. And so when I joined the project, what was it, 2014? We really kind of kept inching the bar up. Like, let's be kind and gracious when we respond to things. Issue tracker. Let's maybe use emojis. I mean, it sounds trivial, but it actually has a huge impact on people. And the other thing is, we really focused on documentation, and it was critical for like Zero to Jupyter Hub and the littlest Jupyter Hub and Binder to have that documentation, because it lets people learn how to fish, and you don't have to fish for them. But like much of open source, I wish we were doing more and we had more resources to target this. And I think one of the things that makes me sad is often folks are afraid that they're going to alienate or scare away the dominant group, i.e. white men with privilege. And because it might be uncomfortable for them to talk about inclusion or diversity, and, oh, they don't know how. Well, that's up to them to learn how, and by focusing on education and being welcoming and documentation, you're naturally increasing the overall pool of people using the project, and that will trickle down into better diversity over time. NCWIT, which is an NSF chartered nonprofit, is doing great research and putting together some high quality resources that are, research-based, not just like, oh, I think this might work. There's like a whole lot of research behind it, and those are great resources. I would encourage people to check them out. But, overall, I could go on for hours about this topic, but I don't really want to. But I think it would be a great topic to do a whole episode on.
Yeah.
Because I think there's so many elements of diversity, ageism as well. It's not just gender.
Right. Here. I think that would be a great episode as well. So maybe
I would vote for Lorena Barba, just to throw that like grenade in there.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll start putting together a dream team and get that scheduled. Hopefully sometime in the next few months here. So
cool.
Well, at this point, normally we have a project demo and walkthrough, but we've taken a lot of time. So do you think we can do this quickly, like a couple minutes? I also feel like most folks probably know Jupyter, but maybe, yeah. Matthias, can you talk really, really fast?
Yeah, I can try.
Are you up to the challenge?
I'm here. I'm already started my screen. So here I'm on the main website, jupyter.org. I'm going to go down and click on try it in your browser. And what you will see is several possibilities, like different languages and UIs. I'm going to do the next one, which is Jupyter Lab. Here we can see some of the services that Carol talked about, which is mybinder.org. MyBinder basically take GitHub repository and turn it into a live things in the cloud. And so here you see this is running actually on a remote server that was created just for me. And you see how easy it is to basically start a project in the cloud and how it's accessible to anyone with just a laptop and a browser. You can directly get access to a computational environment where you can play with Python. And here you see one of the new UI of Jupyter, so Jupyter Lab, who was here on the side. If you can see a side panel with the data sets, which is here remote on a machine, probably somewhere in Google Cloud or on Amazon, I don't know. And you can collapse that. And here you have the normal notebook interface. One of the nice things of Jupyter Lab is that you can put now things side by side, so you have a complete working environment online that could support different file types and everything. And if you're familiar with Jupyter, well, you can just press Shift-Enter to execute things. You can see that you have at the same time code and narrative in line. And we support in Jupyter Lab like writing code, pressing Shift-Enter, but also widgets that give interactivity. Here you see a Lorentz attractor, and with a simple like one function, we can directly make something which is usually take a long time to interact with because you have to modify the code. We make things basically explorable. So you can see how the parameters are basically affecting here these sets of differential equation. And that's really nice because when you don't have a background in math or in computer science, you basically want to get an intuition on how things work to basically move forward fast in your analysis. And so that's basically about it because we're short on. But I encourage you to go to Jupyter.org and click on try it and play with that if you never use Jupyter. I hope this was fast enough.
Yeah, no, that was great.
Amazing.
Very, very well practiced. We'll also have all of the links in the show notes. So if you want to go see more demos and examples, you can check out the show notes that we'll be posting after the episode here, and we'll try to get those in the chat as well. Now we're going to move on to the sort of kind of quote unquote the meat of the episode. So we're going to talk about the direction that Jupyter is going, or the Jupyter ecosystem is going, broadly speaking. So these are places where folks can jump in and contribute, or if you're an organization and you have some money to donate or fund, these are potential areas where Jupyter is going and looking for help and those sorts of things. So keep that in mind when you're looking at or when you're following along with the topics that we're discussing here. So Carol, Matthias, take it away.
So the first thing that comes to my mind is Pinky and the Brain. Every time at the beginning of the episodes, Gee Brain, what are you doing tonight? The same thing we do every night, take over the world. So that's our final goal, like many open source projects. You just have to figure out who between me and Carol is Pinky and who is the Brain. And so I think there are really, joke aside, there are several categories where we want to move forward. I may be going to give Carol the first pass on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say when I first saw Python notebooks, I wanted to take over the education world with the notebooks. And Lorena Barba, I think we were all at the SciPy conference where Lorena did the keynote about how this is a game changer in education. And we've just barely scratched the surface today. One of the great things we did is we had a whole bunch of professors and educators who use Jupyter Hub and the notebooks in teaching, and in a variety of different ways. We wrote an open source book in a 3.5 day book sprint. And you can read about it on the blog post. There's some pictures too, but it's an open source book, which we anticipate will evolve over time as people use things. But in terms of Jupyter Hub and Binder, we're just going to continue to push forward. And a lot of where we grow is somebody on the chat had mentioned like doing an AWS Littlest Jupyter Hub, and had written the documentation and kind of put it together. And then when I was in India, I used it to teach a workshop. So some of the development is driven by the needs of the users, and people get an idea. And one of the things we try to do is on our Gitter channels be very accessible to people, and answer questions. We have a new discourse instance for the Jupyter Hub binder projects that hopefully will let us capture information over time a little better than Gitter does. But in the businesses, I mean, there's a reality with all open source projects that sustainability and the ability to keep momentum and build momentum, ideally, is something that's so critical. And it's really hard to do because you have funders that have money, companies that have money, and then you've got academics and scientists and software developers who maybe aren't trained in fundraising or how to maintain a large software project.
Right.
Much like startups are good at getting things off the ground. So, I mean, that's something that we continuously look at.
There's a cultural impedance mismatch in some sense that needs to be resolved, right? And
yeah.
So that's a real challenge. And
it is. Yeah. But, I think if anything, the tools that we're making is going to help us put together data that help support, that sustainability. So, hey, but I don't know, Matthias, you probably have some ideas as well as to where we're going.
So I'm going to just do two other small points. On the technical side, I mean, the new thing in Jupyter Lab, we're still pushing it toward 1.0, which is still a lot of work, especially we want to enable a real-time collaboration. There is a long story behind why it has not been published, and we don't have the time right now. And on the Python side, I'm pushing toward asynchronous REPL. So basically being able to use async and await directly in the REPL, which is right now kind of working, but would need probably have to push something upstream in CPython, which is like quite a bit of work and have to convince core Python people. Also, I want to talk about sustainability. It's hard to often forget that Jupyter is just the top of the iceberg. We rely on so many work from other people, like the IPython kernel is relying heavily on JEDI for completion, which is not funded. A lot of our libraries that you use through Jupyter are not funded, and without all those libraries, you can't. We can't have the nice experience that Jupyter have. So we have to not forget all of that. Those that are most of them are in hosted by NumFocus, so you can give money to NumFocus to help those libraries. There is also some question about white papers, writing some white papers about what we want to do to be able to say to company, hey, here is what we want to do. Is that interesting for you? Can you give us money? A lot of legacy code to maintain, things that haven't been touched in 10 years and will probably break at some point. We have to figure out how to fix. And of course, as we said before, it's the end of support for Python 2. Can we figure out a way to have paid support through some companies that would help to trickle some funds down to the open source project, which I think is a perfect place to speak about that right now, seeing our hosts. I want to thank you about that. And I think that I will stop there for this section.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, to sort of tie these bits and pieces together a bit, right? It seems like depending on who you are and what your resources are available, there's kind of a few different avenues for interacting with the project and being able to contribute. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just to reiterate here, so if you're just a normal, just a developer doing this volunteer-wise, you can come and help maintain or help work on any of the projects or report issues and bugs and help on documentation and non-code contributions that way. If you're a business that really relies on it for some reason, you can reach out to the Jupyter core team and be reading these white papers potentially when they come out. Or if you want to donate to NumFocus, that's another way to get funds to the Jupyter project.
You can, of course, donate time as well. Like if you're a business and you have developers, you can donate time. And it's not limited to code. Like if you have people that are managing social media and you want to help us manage social media, that's great. It is helpful.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. So anything else on the directions of Jupyter before we move on to our Q&A section?
Too many, I'm guessing.
Too many.
You know, I would say the best, I mean, for short-term direction, the issue trackers and the Gitter channels are a great way to kind of get a sense of what's coming up in the next release and where people's interests are. You know, longer term, I think it's you know, it's usability, performance, you know, fitting into the other people's environments, and that's going to depend on the underlying Jupyter project. But I think what will persist is the open standard and de facto standards that make it so we can do this work across. And as much as I want to see the enterprise stuff flourish so that then they can donate money back into the project, I don't want to lose the open standard for a proprietary standard. I think that would damage the whole ecosystem more than it would improve it.
Right. So it's about standards and having kind of an open development model as well as the no matter who the participants are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And if you want to scratch your current itch, go to the issue tracker and get it. Makes a lot of sense. All right. Well, at this point, we're going to go ahead and answer some questions from our viewers and listeners here. We've got a bunch of them. So we'll start with one by David, who asks, as far as dashboarding/web apps are concerned, where is Jupyter Lab heading? I'm aware of projects like Voila, but it is young. What is the panorama of solutions? Dash, Bokeh app, Voila, IBM dashboards, cross-language specific things. Yeah.
So that's, I mean, those are basically the answer I was typing to answer.
Oh, I see.
There is no. Sorry about the confusion.
No.
There is no one answer. They all have trade-offs. I tapped here a couple that I knew about. So you can have Dash from Plotly. I'm not sure how it integrates with Jupyter Lab. I've heard of Bokeh app. I've heard of Voila from Quansight. There used to be a project from IBM called IBM Dashboard, but you always have this tension, especially because Jupyter is cross-language. How do you design something that will work correctly across languages? And it's harder than in other languages. For example, R have Shiny, and everybody is using Shiny, but Shiny is R only. And so there is some discussion of basically like, what do you want? Do you want something which is only on the front end? I don't have any answer. There is too many things to follow in Jupyter for that. I would suggest to reach to this developer and ask, or reach to our mailing list or our discourse, and get involved. It's the best way of moving things forward.
Yeah, and I think, you know, when it comes to Jupyter Lab in particular, I think what we had at Cal Poly the last few summers is summer interns that are students at Cal Poly, and I think the ability to write extensions for Jupyter Lab and modules that you can then fit into it, that's going to evolve over time. But they made some really phenomenal projects this summer, starting from ground zero. And so I expect that other people with larger resources than we had with the interns will be coming out with cool stuff. And we're just going to see more of that. Yeah, but yeah, it's a great question.
Ivan Pulido asks, the last time I checked, interactive widgets were not working quite well with Jupyter Lab. Is there any news or progress on that?
As far as I can tell, I mean, once you install the Jupyter Lab extension for widgets, it works. The only problem is for widgets that were using private and undocumented API from the classic notebook. Those can't work. That's the only thing. We basically always say, like, they are private and unstable. They won't work with, like, they can break at any time, and those will break. Otherwise, I mean, if you have issues, try to force refresh your browser and come and open an issue on one of the repository, and we'll help you to debug.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing we probably should document a little further is people commonly will not, with Python, it can be very complicated in terms of packaging and virtual environments and conda environments. And oftentimes when the extensions don't work, it's because it's not installed correctly in the correct environment. And that's something that, if you hit a roadblock there, definitely ask on Gitter, because not only are we able to answer it, but there are many community members that are able to answer it as well. So hopefully we can do a better job with that, but please do ask if you don't get it working.
Greg asks or states, I am also interested in dashboarding with app mode, Voila, Thebe, etc., using Jupyter Hub with app mode, but I feel it is too easy for business users to get the code version by accident.
I'm not sure I understand this.
So I think I see where this is coming from, and I believe that's one of the reasons behind Voila and some of the extensions that Sylvain, his folks at Quansight wrote. Is basically for business purposes, how can you hide the code or at least prevent users from sending the code and just executing what already exists. I don't think there is a perfect solution right now, because most of Jupyter is based on openness, and basically you want to do everything you want. At some point, you have to think that maybe Jupyter is not the right solution, or not yet, and say that you actually want to hire a developer to package that into a nice app, maybe in Python, maybe in something else, which is exposed to your client. But you basically always have trade-offs in many things, and right now it's not. Jupyter is just not targeted at this use case.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking that, Matthias.
Offray says, thank you for the seminar and talking about diversity. There's an increasing trend in the development and use of computational notebooks, and they've got an environment called Graphoscopio that is done for or from a global South perspective. And for these different computational notebooks, what would be a good way to make these different approaches talk to each other? I think if you look at Graphoscopio, I followed the link. It is a Smalltalk based notebook environment.
Okay. So I think I was reading the chat earlier, and there was a point made that, in some of the developing countries, or in countries that don't have as stable electricity or internet or bandwidth, the ability to have like a standalone, something that's doesn't rely so heavily on downloading packages is really important. One of the ways that we've sort of addressed that initially is the Docker stacks, which somebody very kindly linked to, which has a lot of different types and combinations of packages with the actual notebook interface. Then there's other projects like Interact, which you can download a binary and install it that way. I think, we're going to see more and more solutions that fit different niche things. And that's, I think, the power of being able to have different UIs on the front. But, I hear it, I've been at conferences like Grace Hopper when GitHub went down, and I was teaching a workshop about notebooks, and thank goodness I had downloaded Anaconda on a bunch of thumb drives, or I would have been, I wouldn't have been able to do anything with the students. So, but
and
it's a great question.
Get people together in the same room. Trying to work together online is sometimes harder. One nice initiative that 2 years ago in Berkeley was to get people from like different domain, different language for the same, like for graphs, together in the same room and say, hey, can we make graph in different language, talk to each other, and can we get something common? And that's like basically nothing went out of the week except people started to work together on something after. So people talked together for a week and then they managed to get something out. Don't underestimate getting people in the same room.
Of course not. And okay. Well, at this point, we're going to move on to our world famous rant section, where each person gets a 15-second rant, or 15 seconds to rant about whatever topic they want. Carol, I believe it is your soapbox first.
I'm not really a ranter, but one thing that is like a little pet peeve is naming of variables. And yes, naming is hard, but little bit of extra time spent trying to select a meaningful name that it pays off down the road in documentation, in usability, in maintaining of the code, and like it just makes everybody's life easier. So developers, don't be in such a hurry to get stuff out that you have crummy variable names.
Good advice. Matthias?
I'm going to rant on the keyboard and touch bar of the new MacBook Pros that are completely horrible. I'm using Vim. I can't tap the escape key even if I remap my cache log to escape. And my computer is 3 months old, and the E key is already randomly pressing E 0 or 3 times. So that's going to be it for me. I hate it, and I would gladly get back to the older version of the keyboard.
This is my solution to the MacBook Pro.
You can't buy the wired keyboard from Apple anymore.
Solve it in hardware. David?
Technology and control are on my mind. In the past week, we've had some interesting stories around Google and Facebook doing some ethically questionable monitoring in exchange for money of users' use of technology and actions. And we had a kind of superhero in this story, but that's also disturbing. So Apple then revoked their certificates for their internal applications, purportedly wreaking havoc, especially on Facebook. And so, you know, I don't know what the answer there is, but there's something very dystopian and disturbing about the situation in general, about, you know, the spying, the ability to cripple parts of operations of corporations by revoking a certificate. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm just worried.
Well, my rant today is a book recommendation. I've seen a lot of folks commenting in the past week that their batteries haven't been working as well in the polar vortex conditions that we've been experiencing in the northern US. I highly recommend The Worst Journey in the World by Apsley Cherry Gerard. It follows the 1912 Robert Falcon Scott expedition to the South Pole. If you like to watch untested technology break in the cold when scientists' lives are at stake, this is some of the best literature out there. Also, it's free on Project Gutenberg, so go check it out. That's all the time that we have for today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. You can find us on Twitter at Quansight AI. If you are interested in funding open source projects, including the Jupyter ecosystem, you can find all of the project roadmaps at quansight.com/projects. Carol and Matthias, where can folks find you and find the Jupyter ecosystem?
Well, they can find me. The best way is on GitHub because I am horrible with email, and or in the Jupyter in Education Google group, or the main Jupyter Google group, or Gitter, like we talked about before.
Thanks, David and Anthony, and all the staff behind this webinar, of course, Quansight, for having us today. It was a pleasure. Thanks to all the listeners that are live and the one who will listen to the YouTube or the podcast broadcast. I'm MBUSSONN on Twitter and Caro on GitHub. Or you can, if it's code-based, you can git blame and look at my email if it's my fault to contact me.
Well, thank you both, and join us again next episode for an insightful view into ITK. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.